Evelyn Caldwell tore the wedding veil off her head and threw it into the fireplace. She watched it burn, 3 hours before she was supposed to become Mrs. Richard Pierce. She stood in her wedding dress, with a letter shaking in her hands, a letter written in her fiancé's own handwriting. Addressed to another man, describing her as a gentle creature who would not cause difficulty. He had never loved her. He had purchased her, and somewhere outside, in the gray Virginia dawn, a horse had just stopped in the courtyard. A rider, a man who had traveled through the entire night. A man she had not seen in 3 years. The veil was still burning when Evelyn heard the knock at her bedroom door. She didn't answer it. She stood with her back to the door and her face to the fireplace, watching the last of the white silk curl into black at the edges. It had been expensive. Everything about this wedding had been expensive. The flowers shipped from Richmond, the dress with its seed pearls, the church decorated with more candles than the Caldwell estate had burned in a full year. Richard Pierce did not do things halfway. He understood that appearances were a form of currency. And he had been spending lavishly for 6 months, and she had let herself believe that spending meant feeling. She knew better now. Her maid's voice, careful and low from the other side of the door. "Miss Evelyn, there's a man downstairs. He's asking for you. Tell my father I'll be down in a moment." A pause. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn looked at the letter in her hand. She had already read it 4 times, once in the dark when she'd found it slipped under her door before dawn. Once by candlelight, once in the gray early light coming through the window. And once more just now, standing in her wedding dress, because she had needed to be absolutely certain she had understood it correctly. She had understood it correctly. The letter was from Richard. Written in his hand, that sharp, slanted handwriting she'd seen a dozen times on business correspondence, and addressed to a man named Hollis Beauchamp in Charleston. It laid out, in the efficient language of a man who saw no reason to be indirect when no one important was reading, exactly what Richard Pierce expected to gain from marrying Evelyn Margaret Caldwell. The Caldwell name, the social standing in Harlow County, the land on the northern boundary left in trust by her grandfather, the shipping route access her father had built over 20 years of careful relationships with merchants from here to the coast. And at the bottom, in that same slanted hand, after the marriage is formalized, estate management transfers to me by right. Evelyn will come to understand that a wife's purpose is to support her husband's vision, not maintain her own. She is a gentle creature, compliant. She will not cause difficulty. She is a gentle creature. Evelyn had read that line 5 times, not because she hadn't understood it the first time, but because each time she read it, something inside her shifted a little further, the way a fence post shifts when the ground beneath it finally gives way. Slow, and then all at once a collapse. She folded the letter, set it on the mantelpiece, looked at the burning veil one last time. Then she turned to the wardrobe. The wedding dress came off. She unhooked it herself methodically, each button a small deliberate act. She hung it on the rail with the same care she'd been taught to show all fine things carefully, precisely, without sentiment, and then she reached past it. Dark blue wool, plain cut. The dress she wore when she rode out to check the tenants or helped her aunt go over accounts. Serviceable, honest. She was fastening the last button when she heard the hoofbeats. Not a carriage. She had grown up listening to arrivals at the estate gate and knew the difference. This was a single horse, moving hard, the rhythm uneven with exhaustion. Someone had been riding through the night. The estate dogs erupted. She heard Thomas, the groundskeeper, shout. Then more voices, urgent, confused. Then her father, sharper than usual, with an edge she recognized as fear, wearing the costume of authority. Evelyn went to the window. The horse was dark with sweat, its head low, its breath coming in clouds in the cold morning air. The rider had already dismounted. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, wearing a coat gray with road dust, and he was pulling off his hat as he turned toward the house. She saw his face. Her hand pressed flat against the window frame. Alexander Beaumont Whitaker. 3 years. 3 years of silence so complete she had eventually stopped listening for any sound of him. Stopped checking for letters, stopped herself, mid-thought, when her mind drifted in his direction. Which it had done, against her will, more times than she would ever admit to anyone. He had left without explanation. A brief goodbye to her father. A single nod in her direction, and then no word. No letter. Just absence, clean, total, and bewildering. Like a door closing on a room she hadn't realized she depended on until the air changed. She had told herself she wasn't waiting. She had been waiting. He looked up, found her window, found her face in the space of a breath. As though he already knew exactly where to look. Something moved across his expression. Something she couldn't name from this distance, but that looked briefly like a man who had been afraid of something and was only now starting to breathe again. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he walked toward the front door. And Evelyn was already moving toward the stairs. Her father met Alexander in the front hall. Evelyn stopped at the top of the staircase and listened. "Don't know what you think gives you the right to arrive at this hour," her father's voice. Tight and controlled. Alexander's voice was steady. Not loud. The voice of a man who had decided what he was going to say and was not going to be hurried out of it. "I have ridden since yesterday evening. I am not here to cause trouble. I am here because your daughter deserves to know the truth about the man she's about to marry before she marries him. Give me 10 minutes, this is not the time, for it is exactly the time." A pause. "You know me, Edmund. You have known me for 20 years. I am asking you for 10 minutes. Evelyn came down the stairs. Both men turned. Her father looked at her dress, the dark blue wool. The traveling cut, the absence of the ivory gown, and something in his face went very still. "Evelyn," his voice was careful, "go back upstairs." "This is not, I'm already dressed, father." She came down the last 2 steps. She looked at Alexander. "You've traveled through the night?" "Yes." "Then you'd better come tell me why." They sat in the study. Her father stood moving between the window and the fireplace with the restless, contained energy of a man who senses a verdict coming and cannot stop it. Alexander reached into his coat and placed 3 documents on the desk. He didn't preamble. He didn't soften it. He looked at Evelyn directly and spoke. "6 months ago, a woman came to my office in Richmond. Her name was Clara Osgood. She was engaged to Richard Pierce 4 years ago. In Charleston. The date was set, 3 weeks before the wedding. Pierce broke off the engagement without explanation. Her family was left to manage the scandal alone." He paused. "That is not the whole of it." "Tell me the whole of it," Evelyn said. "Clara came to me because she had learned through her brother's business connections that Pierce had entered into a financial arrangement with her father's former partner 18 months before he broke the engagement. The arrangement included her dowry lands, when it became clear the business deal would be more profitable than the marriage. Pierce terminated the engagement and moved on." He gestured to the first document. "I spent 3 months verifying it. Clara was not the first woman. There were 2 others before her. Same pattern each time, a family with something he wants. A courtship, an engagement, and then a withdrawal and calculation changes." The room was very quiet. Evelyn's father had stopped moving. The 3rd document, Alexander continued. His voice level, "arrived at my office last week. It is a letter from Pierce to Hollis Beauchamp in Charleston. In it, he outlines his intentions for the Caldwell estate after the marriage is formalized. He has already identified buyers for the timber rights on the northern land. He has already made inquiries about restructuring your father's shipping agreements. A beat. He has already begun what he calls the transition planning." Evelyn looked at the document. She recognized the handwriting immediately, the same hand as the letter upstairs on her mantelpiece. "I received a letter this morning," she said. Her voice was quiet. She kept it that way deliberately before sunrise. "Someone slipped it under my door." Her father looked at her sharply. What letter? From Richard to Beauchamp. She looked at her father directly. He described me as a gentle creature who would not cause difficulty. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than before. Her father sat down heavily in the chair behind the desk. He looked, suddenly, older than she had ever seen him, as though the last 5 minutes had cost him something he could not get back. Edmund, Alexander's voice carefully gentle, I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer it honestly. Her father looked up. How much did you know? A long pause, not her father stopped. Pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment. Then, not the full extent of it. I knew the arrangement was practical. I knew he saw financial value in the connection. I told myself that was not so different from most matches. He looked at Evelyn. The look cost him something. I told myself you would be comfortable. That he would treat you well, and you would have security. And what? Evelyn said. Her voice had not risen. That was the thing she was most aware of in that moment, how steady her voice was. How clear, how entirely unlike the trembling she would have expected from herself an hour ago. And I was afraid, her father said. The words fell out of him like something he'd been holding up for a long time that had simply gotten too heavy. The debts are not small. I have made mistakes, serious mistakes, and I have been afraid for 2 years. And when Pierce came forward, he seemed like a solution. He seemed like the answer to a problem I had created and didn't know how to solve. His voice broke on the last word. Just slightly, Evelyn. I am so deeply sorry. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the wedding dress on the rail upstairs. She thought about 3 fittings where she'd stood very still and let a seamstress pin and tuck, and said nothing about the collar that sat too high. She thought about 6 months of dinners and drawing-room evenings and carriage rides with a man who had looked at her the way a person looks at a property they are in the process of acquiring. She thought about all the things she had noticed and not said. I need to hear, she said quietly, that you love me more than you love the solution. Her father looked at her. His eyes were bright. More than anything in this world, he said. More than anything. She nodded once. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an acknowledgement that the door was not closed. That there was ground still to stand on between them. She stood up. She picked up the 3 documents from the desk and held them in both hands. Where is Richard right now? She asked. Beaumont Inn, Alexander said. He's not expected at the church for another 2 hours. The guests? Arriving within the hour. She thought about Reverend Aldous and his careful hands folded over his Bible. She thought about Mrs. Addie Whitmore's bright, pleased voice, white roses. Real ones, shipped from Richmond. Isn't that just the most wonderful thing? She thought about Richard Pierce in his impeccable coat. Already certain of the morning's outcome. She thought about the word compliant. Mr. Whittaker, she said. Miss Caldwell, did you ride through the night to convince me to choose you? The question dropped into the room like a stone. She watched him carefully, watched for the flinch, for the recalibration, for the particular adjustment that men made when they'd been caught wanting something they hadn't admitted to wanting. He didn't flinch. He looked at her with an expression that was entirely unguarded and entirely steady. No, he said. I rode through the night because you deserved the truth. What you do with it is your own affair, Miss Caldwell. It always has been. She held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then she looked at her father. Send word to Reverend Aldous, she said. Tell him the ceremony may need to be delayed. Her father straightened. Evelyn, if you go to that church and make a scene, the entire county will... I'm not going to the church. She was already moving toward the door. I'm going to speak with Richard Pierce directly. She paused in the doorway. He should hear it from me, and I should be the one to say it. Richard Pierce was finishing breakfast when she walked into the private dining room of the Beaumont Inn unhurried, unruffled, exactly as she would have expected of a man who had never once considered that the morning might not go according to his plan. He was immaculate, dark coat, white cravat, hair precisely set. He stood when he saw her and he smiled. She knew that smile. She had catalogued it over 6 months, the exact pressure of it, the precise warmth it projected, the way it reached his eyes just far enough to be convincing. She had wanted to believe it was real. She had worked quite hard at believing it. She set that work down now. Evelyn. He moved toward her, both hands extended. You shouldn't be here before the ceremony, it's terribly informal. And you're down, Richard. He stopped. The smile recalibrated. I beg your pardon? Sit down. She placed the documents on the table in front of him. And read those. He looked at the papers. Something moved through his expression quickly, efficiently, like a man running a calculation. Then he looked back at her. He did not reach for the documents. Where did you get these? Does it matter? It matters considerably. His voice had shifted, still controlled. But the warmth had receded, like a lamp turned down to its lowest setting. Whoever provided those to you is interfering in private business arrangements. Private business arrangements involving my family's estate, she said. My inheritance, my grandfather's land, which will be managed far more effectively under proper oversight, he said smoothly. Evelyn, your father has allowed this property to deteriorate for years. The debt alone. I have read the letter to Beauchamp, she said. Both of them. He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. You have been thorough, he said. I have been quiet, she said. For most of my life, I confused the two. Richard set down his fork. He leaned back slightly in his chair and studied her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, a look of frank assessment. The kind he hadn't bothered to conceal behind warmth, because he had apparently decided warmth was no longer the efficient tool here. You are making a significant decision, he said carefully. Based on documents that were obtained and delivered by a man who has obvious personal interest in your choice. The documents are in your handwriting, she said. Handwriting can be Richard. Her voice was quiet. Absolute. I was prepared, she said. To give you my future. To take your name. To stand beside you and build something I believed was honest. She kept her eyes on his. I was not prepared to discover that you had been building something else entirely, something that required my silence and my compliance, and my inability to read a business letter. A pause. That was your miscalculation, not mine. He was very still now. You have nothing without your father's estate, he said. And there it was, the voice beneath the voice, flat and pragmatic and entirely without pretense. You have a name and a family home that is hemorrhaging money, and a father who cannot manage a household account. You think you can walk away from a match like this and find another? At your age? She had expected this. She had, in the last hour, prepared for exactly this. And so it didn't land the way he intended it to, not as a blow, but as a confirmation. There it is, she said quietly. He blinked. Just once. There what is. The truth of what you think of me. She picked up the documents. I wanted to make sure I heard it clearly before I left. Evelyn, I wish you well. Richard. She meant it, in the way you mean something when you have finally released it entirely. I genuinely do, but I will not be marrying you today. Or any other day. She turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, she heard the scrape of his chair fast. Sharp, and then his voice, no longer smooth, no longer controlled. The voice of a man who had lost something he'd already spent. You are making a catastrophic mistake. Your father will lose everything. She stopped walking. She did not turn around. My father, she said clearly, made his mistakes. I won't compound them by making mine. She walked out. Alexander was in the hallway. He straightened when he saw her face, and whatever he read there made him step forward slightly, not toward her. Exactly, just forward, the way a person moves when they want to be available without being presumptuous. Are you all right? He asked. She considered the question seriously. The way it deserved to be considered. He told me I had nothing without my father's estate, she said. That I was too old and too poor to do better. Alexander's jaw tightened. Evelyn, he was trying to frighten me back into compliance, she said. It didn't work. She looked at him steadily. I want you to know that. It didn't work because of what I decided, Not because you were standing in the hallway. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once, with the gravity of a man who understood the distinction and respected it fully. I know that, he said. Good. They walked out of the Beaumont Inn into the spring morning. The horses were waiting, somewhere in the distance. The church bells rang the wedding hour. Passing without ceremony, without witnesses, without a bride in white. Evelyn lifted her face to the morning air. It tasted different than she expected. Not like triumph, not like grief, like the first breath after a long time of breathing carefully. They rode back to the estate in silence. The kind between two people who have sense enough for now and both know it. The road ran along the edge of the Caldwell property, and she found herself looking at it differently than she had in years. Not through the lens of what it represented, what it owed, what it needed to become, just looking at it as itself. The fence posts her grandfather set, the creek marking the northern boundary. The trees her father had planted when she was small enough to think they were enormous. It was still hers. Whatever came next, it was still hers. At the gate she reined in Alexander. He stopped beside her. 3 years ago, she said. Why did you leave? He looked at the road ahead for a moment. Then he looked at her. Because I had realized something, he said quietly. About what I felt, and I did not believe I had the right to say it. Your father had certain expectations for you. Your life was already arranged. And he stopped. I did not want to be one more person deciding what your future should look like. Evelyn was quiet. That, she said at last, was both very honorable and genuinely maddening. Something moved across his face slow. Unguarded, the beginning of something she hadn't seen from him in years. Yes, he said. I've reached that conclusion myself. This past day or so. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned her horse toward the house. I need time, she said. Not looking back. After this morning, I don't know exactly what I need. But time is part of it. Take all of it, he said simply. She nodded and rode on. Behind her, she heard him follow, not ahead of her. Not beside her, a half-length back. The way a person rides when they want to make clear, without a single word, that they are not leading. She did not tell him to go back. Evelyn Caldwell rode toward her home in the pale spring light, with 3 documents folded against her chest, and something moving in her that had been very still for a very long time. She had not won anything today. She had simply refused to lose herself. And for the first time in 25 years, that felt like enough. The ride back from the Beaumont Inn took 10 minutes. It felt longer. Evelyn kept her eyes on the road and her hands steady on the reins. And she did not let herself think about Richard Pierce's face in that final moment, the mask coming off, the calculation showing through, the voice that had dropped all pretense of warmth and gone flat and cold as riverstone. She did not let herself think about it because she knew if she started, she would have to feel all of it at once, and she was not ready for that yet. There would be time later. There would be a great deal of time later. In the quiet, when all of this was over and the county had finished talking, and she was left alone with the full weight of what this morning had cost. For now she rode. Alexander stayed a half-length behind her the whole way. He didn't speak, he didn't push. She was beginning to understand that this was simply how he was, that his silence was not absence but a kind of presence. Steady and unhurried, the way a good fence holds its ground without making noise about it. When they reached the estate, her father was standing at the front door. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him. Edmund Caldwell had always been a tall man, broad through the shoulders, with the particular bearing of someone who had spent decades being looked to. But standing there in the pale morning light, watching his daughter ride in from a meeting that had unmade everything he'd arranged, he looked like a man who had set down something very heavy and wasn't sure he'd ever be able to pick it back up. Evelyn dismounted. She handed her reins to the groom without looking away from her father. She's here, her father called back into the house. To whom? She wasn't sure. Then to her Evelyn, there are people arriving. The Whitmore family is already on the road. Reverend Aldous sent his deacon asking. Tell them the wedding has been postponed, she said. Her father blinked. Postponed. Indefinitely postponed. She walked past him into the house. I'll write a letter to Reverend Aldous myself. Behind her. She heard her father turn to Alexander. You. His voice was not angry, it was something more complicated than anger. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as gratitude and resentment and shame. All pressed together into a single syllable. You did this. Alexander's voice was quiet. Your daughter did this. I only made sure she had the information she needed to do it. A pause. Come inside, her father said finally. Both of you. We have a great deal to manage before this morning gets any worse. It got worse within the hour. Mrs. Addie Whitmore arrived first breathless and pink-cheeked. In her best dress, with her 2 daughters behind her, and a gift wrapped in blue paper tucked under her arm. She came through the front door already talking, already bright, with the particular pleasure of a woman who considers herself central to any occasion of social importance. And she stopped dead in the hallway when she saw Evelyn standing there in her dark blue traveling dress with no veil. No flowers, no expression that resembled a bride. Evelyn Margaret Caldwell, Addie said. What on earth are you wearing? Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. Where is your gown? The ceremony is in. Addie looked at the clock on the wall. Then back at Evelyn. Evelyn, what has happened? The wedding has been called off, Evelyn said. I'm sorry you made the trip. The Caldwells will of course return any gifts called off. Addie stared at her. What do you mean, called off? Richard is already. She stopped. Her eyes moved past Evelyn to where Alexander Whitaker stood near the study doorway. Still in his road-dusty coat. Something shifted in Addie's expression, a rapid, practiced calculation that Evelyn recognized as the beginning of a story being assembled in real time. Alexander Whitaker. What are you doing here? Visiting an old friend, he said pleasantly. On the morning of her wedding. Formerly, he said. In the same pleasant tone, Addie Whitmore looked between them. Then she looked at Evelyn with an expression that had gone from surprise to something cooler and more watchful. Evelyn, she said carefully, whatever has happened this morning, I want you to think very carefully about what you are doing. A woman in your position cannot afford, Mrs. Whitmore. Evelyn's voice was gentle but absolute. Thank you for coming. I mean that sincerely. I will send a proper note by the end of the week. Addie opened her mouth. Closed it. Then she looked at her 2 daughters, looked back at Evelyn, and drew herself up with the particular dignity of a woman who has been dismissed and intends to make something of it later. Very well, she said. Very well, she left. Her daughters followed, casting curious looks back over their shoulders. The front door closed. In the silence that followed, Evelyn heard her father exhale a long, shaky breath from somewhere behind her. That, he said, is only the beginning. He was right. By 10 o'clock, 4 more carriages had arrived and been turned away. By 11, the deacon from Reverend Aldous's church had come and gone with a note and a strained expression. By noon, Evelyn had written 7 letters to the guests who had traveled the farthest, to the church, to the florist, to the caterers who had prepared a wedding breakfast that would now go uneaten. She wrote them at the desk in the study, quickly and clearly. And she did not apologize in any of them. She explained that the engagement had been dissolved due to information that had come to light. She thanked the recipients for their understanding. She signed her name without a tremor. She was sealing the 6th letter when her father came in and sat down heavily in the chair across from her. Richard came to the house, he said. Evelyn looked up. When? About an hour ago, while you were upstairs. I sent him away. A pause. He was not pleased. What did he say? Her father was quiet for a moment. Then he said the documents Whitaker brought were falsified. He said Whitaker has been carrying a grievance against him for years over a business dispute. He said. He stopped. His jaw worked slightly. He said you had been manipulated by a man with ulterior motives and that you were too naive to see it. Evelyn set down her pen. And what did you say? She asked. Her father looked at her. I said. He replied slowly that I had seen the documents myself, that I recognized his handwriting, and that he should leave my property. Something in Evelyn's chest released, not fully. Not completely, but enough. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. He rubbed a hand over his face. Richard Pierce has friends in this county, Evelyn. Real friends, men with influence, men who have done business with him for years. By tonight, there will be a version of this morning circulating in every parlor and tavern from here to Richmond. And in that version, you will be paused. The story will not be kind to you. The story never is, she said. To the woman. He had nothing to say to that, because there was nothing to say. She picked up her pen and finished the letter. It was mid-afternoon when Alexander knocked on the study door. Evelyn was alone by then. Her father had finally gone to lie down, worn through by the morning, and the house had quieted into that particular exhausted stillness that follows a crisis. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. There's something else, he said. Something I didn't tell you this morning. She set down her pen. Come in. He came in and sat down across from her. The same chair her father had occupied an hour ago. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at her with an expression that told her, before he said a word, that what followed was going to be difficult. Clara Osgood, he said. The woman from Charleston who came to my office. Yes. She didn't just come to me because of the broken engagement. He paused. She came to me because she recently gave birth to a child. A boy. He held Evelyn's gaze.
Pierce's.
He knows. He has known since before he began his courtship of you. The room was very quiet. He has a son, Evelyn said, in Charleston. Clara's family has managed to keep it quiet. The child was registered under her name only. No father listed. But Pierce knows, and he has made no arrangement for the child's support. None. Clara came to me because she needed documentation of the affair in order to bring a claim before a magistrate. And she knew Pierce would deny everything unless someone with resources was willing to help her build the case. Evelyn stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there for a moment with her back to him, looking out at the estate grounds, the fence her grandfather set. The old oak at the property corner, the afternoon light coming flat and gold across the grass. He was courting me, she said, sending flowers to this house. Sitting across from my father at dinner, talking about what kind of future he wanted to build. A pause. And in Charleston there was a woman and a child, and he never intended to acknowledge them. No, she turned around. Does Clara have legal recourse, she asked, with the right documentation? Yes, Virginia law is limited in what it can compel a man to do. But there are mechanisms, especially if the case can be brought before the right magistrate. He paused. I have been helping her build that case. That was part of why it took me 3 months to bring the full picture to you. I needed Clara's situation to be secure before I moved, because I was not willing to use her story as a weapon and then leave her exposed. Evelyn looked at him. You protected her first, she said. I tried to. And then you came for me, yes. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about Clara Osgood in Charleston, a woman she had never met. Carrying a child alone, going to the office of a man she barely knew because she had run out of other options. She thought about the particular kind of courage that required. The particular kind of desperation beneath the courage. I want to write to her, Evelyn said. Alexander blinked. I beg your pardon. I want to write to her. Not through a lawyer, not through an intermediary. She sat back down at the desk and pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her. Woman to woman. She deserves to know that what she did coming forward changed something. That it mattered. He watched her for a moment with an expression she couldn't read. You just had your wedding canceled this morning, he said finally. I'm aware. And your first impulse is to write a letter to a woman in Charleston. My first impulse, she said. Dipping her pen was to burn something. I already did that. This is my second impulse. She looked up briefly. Will you give me her address? He gave her Clara's address. Then he sat quietly in the corner of the study while she wrote. And the afternoon moved around them, And outside the estate began to settle into the long, uncomfortable hush that follows a day that has broken everything it started with. She had finished the letter and was sealing it when she heard voices in the hallway, sharp voices. Multiple, and beneath them the sound of her father, trying to manage something he was not managing well. She was out of the study before Alexander could stand. 3 men were in the front hall. She recognized 2 of them, Judge Harlan Meade and Thomas Ellsworth, who managed the largest dry goods operation in the county. The third she did not know, younger, narrow-faced, with the particular look of a man who has been sent somewhere as a representative rather than arriving on his own initiative. Her father was standing between them and the staircase with the expression of a man holding a door shut against a strong wind. Evelyn. He turned when he heard her on the stairs, and the relief in his voice was almost painful. "These gentlemen, I know who Judge Meade and Mr. Ellsworth are," she said, coming down the last steps. "Good afternoon, gentlemen, Miss Caldwell." Judge Meade, a large man, silver-haired, with the particular solemnity of someone who had spent decades being deferred to, inclined his head. "We have come on behalf of a shared concern." "I imagine you have," she said. "Richard Pierce is a man of considerable standing in this community," Meade said carefully. "What has occurred today has implications for his reputation, for his business relationships, for his," she said quietly. Meade paused. "I beg your pardon? Mr. Pierce's timber contracts run through your district." Judge Meade. "And Mr. Ellsworth, your supply arrangements with the northern landholders are underwritten in part by Pierce's capital." She looked between them calmly. "I did not spend 6 months of engagement without paying attention to my fiancé's business arrangements. I simply wasn't meant to understand what I was looking at." Ellsworth's expression had gone carefully neutral. "Miss Caldwell," he said, "no one is suggesting you acted improperly." "Then what are you suggesting?" A silence. "We are suggesting," Meade said, with the precision of a man choosing each word like a step across uncertain ground, "that perhaps this matter could be resolved quietly. That a private conversation between yourself and Mr. Pierce, facilitated by—" The word was short. "Not heated, not apologetic, Miss Caldwell. No," she said again. "I will not be having a private conversation with Richard Pierce. I will not be reconsidering. I will not be persuaded that my dignity is a suitable sacrifice for the comfort of the county's business arrangements." She looked at both men evenly. "I have documents in my father's study that detail, in Mr. Pierce's own handwriting, his intentions for this family's estate after marriage. I have testimony regarding his conduct toward at least 3 other women in 2 states. I have no intention of burying any of that for anyone's convenience, including yours." The narrow-faced young man in the back made a small, involuntary sound. Ellsworth looked at Meade. Meade looked at Evelyn. "You understand," Meade said slowly, "that this will have consequences for your family's standing." "My family's standing," she said, "was already mortgaged to a man who was planning to sell it. I am not sure it can sustain much more damage from the truth than it has already sustained from the lie." Behind her, she heard Alexander's step in the hallway. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. "Gentlemen." His voice came from somewhere just behind her shoulder, steady, not aggressive, the voice of a man establishing a position. "I believe Miss Caldwell has been clear. She has nothing further to discuss with you today." Meade looked past her at Alexander. Something moved in the older man's expression, a recalculation. "Quick and practiced," he said. "I might have been known, Judge," Alexander replied, in a tone of perfect civility. Another silence. Then Meade straightened and smoothed his coat and became, in the space of a breath, the version of himself that left rooms gracefully. "We will see ourselves out," he said. They did. The front door closed. The 3 of them, Evelyn, her father Alexander, stood in the hall in the ringing quiet that followed. Then her father made a sound. It was not quite a laugh. It was the sound a man makes when something has just happened that is both terrible and, in its own peculiar way, clarifying. "Judge Meade," he said. "In my front hall, yes. Richard sent Judge Meade to talk you back into the wedding. He sent Judge Meade to frighten me, she said. It didn't work. Her father looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly, not in disapproval, but in something closer to wonder. You are, he said quietly. So much more than I gave you credit for. It was the most honest thing he had said to her in years. Maybe ever. She didn't know what to do with it, not yet. So she nodded and went back to the study by evening. 3 more things happened that changed the shape of what came next. The first was a letter. It arrived by courier at 4 in the afternoon, a formal, precisely worded document from Richard Pierce's attorney, informing Edmund Caldwell that Mr. Pierce was prepared to pursue a breach of contract claim related to the dissolution of the engagement, citing losses incurred in preparation for the marriage. The letter included a figure. It was not a small figure. Evelyn read it twice. Then she handed it to Alexander without a word. He read it. His expression didn't change. He's bluffing, he said. Partly. Which part isn't a bluff? The legal mechanism is real. Breach of contract claims in broken engagements have precedent in Virginia. But for him to pursue it, he would have to file publicly, which means the documents I brought and Clara Osgood's testimony would enter the public record. He set the letter on the desk. He is betting you don't know that. He keeps betting I don't know things, she said. Yes, it appears to be a pattern. She looked at the letter. What do we do? You write back. Through your own attorney. He paused. Do you have one? My father has Mr. Abner Fitch in Harlow. Fitch is competent. Send for him tomorrow morning. He looked at her steadily. And Evelyn, I want you to understand something. If Pierce pursues this, it will be unpleasant. It will be public, and the press will not be gentle. And people who have been friendly to your family for years will find reasons to look the other way for a while. That is the reality. And if I settle quietly, then he knows exactly how much you can be pressured for. And he will use that number again someday. Against you or against someone else. She looked at him. You think I should fight it, she said. I think, he said carefully, that it is your decision. But yes, I think you should fight it. She picked up the letter and set it in the drawer of her father's desk. Send for Mr. Fitch tomorrow, she said. I'll be here. The second thing happened at 5 o'clock. When Evelyn went upstairs to finally change her dress, she had been in the dark blue wool since before dawn and found her younger cousin, Nora, sitting on the floor outside her bedroom door. Nora was 19. She had grown up on the neighboring property and had spent the better part trailing Evelyn with a devotion that had mellowed, over the years, into something closer to genuine affection. She was sitting with her knees pulled to her chest and her face turned toward the window at the end of the corridor. And when she heard Evelyn's step, she scrambled up and tried to look like she had not been crying. I heard, Nora said immediately. I heard everything, not on purpose. I was in the garden when Judge Meade arrived, and the window was open, and she stopped. Evelyn, I'm all right, Evelyn said. You don't have to say that if you're not. I know. She looked at her cousin's young, worried face. The tears she was pretending hadn't happened. The determined set of her jaw. I'm tired, and I have a great deal ahead of me. But I am genuinely all right. Nora was quiet for a moment. I never liked him, she said. Richard. I never liked him, and I didn't say so because everyone kept telling me how perfect he was, and I thought maybe I was just being. She stopped. Her chin went up slightly. I should have said so. Yes, Evelyn said. Gently, you should have, Nora winced. That's fair. Next time someone makes your skin feel wrong, Evelyn said. Say it out loud. Nora nodded. Then she looked at her cousin with an expression that was trying to be casual and failing completely. Mr. Whitaker is very handsome, she said. Evelyn gave her a look. He's also very good, Nora pressed on undeterred. Everybody says so. My mother says he's the most honorable man in 3 counties, and she doesn't say that about anyone. She doesn't even say it about father. Go home, Nora, I'm just saying, go home. But she said it without sharpness. And Nora went with a small, satisfied smile that Evelyn chose not to dignify. She changed her dress. She stood at the window for a moment in the early evening quiet, looking out at the grounds, and she let herself feel, for the first time all day, the full weight of what the morning had been. The letter, the veil in the fireplace, the ride to the inn. Richard's voice going flat and cold, Mead and Ellsworth in her front hallway. The attorney's letter in the desk drawer. She felt it all. Then she straightened and went back downstairs. The third thing happened at 7 in the evening, and it was the most significant of the three. She found Alexander in the front room, standing near the cold fireplace with a paper in his hand and an expression she had not seen on him before, not troubled. Exactly, but careful in the way a man looks when he is deciding how much to say. "What is it?" she said. He looked up. He hesitated just for a moment. But she caught it. "Tell me," she said. He handed her the paper. It was a short note, unsigned, written on plain paper in a hand she didn't recognize. It had been delivered to the estate, apparently, while she was upstairs. She read it. Her face went very still. The note said that Richard Pierce had visited the offices of Caldwell Shipping's primary merchant contact, a man named Greer, who handled the largest portion of the family's river trade that afternoon. It said that Pierce had offered Greer a renegotiated rate structure on his existing contracts if Greer would publicly withdraw his business relationship with the Caldwell family and cite concerns about their financial stability as the reason. It said that Greer had not yet given his answer. Evelyn read the note twice. Then she set it on the mantelpiece and stood very still for a moment. "He is going to dismantle my father's business," she said, "while he pursues the breach of contract claim. He is going to strip the Caldwell name from every commercial relationship in the county simultaneously, so that even if we win in court, there is nothing left to protect." "That appears to be the plan," Alexander said. "Yes," she looked at him. "Greer hasn't decided yet." "That's the opening." He paused. "I know Greer. I've done business with him for 8 years. He is a practical man. He goes where the reliable money is. If I speak with him tonight, before Pierce can close the arrangement, and offer him a better guarantee on your behalf, with my resources behind it temporarily until your father's position is stabilized." She stared at him. "Alexander, you cannot spend your own capital to prop up my father's business because Richard Pierce is trying to punish me for refusing to marry him." "I can," he said simply. "That is not," she stopped. "That is not a reasonable thing to ask of you. You didn't ask." He met her gaze directly. "Evelyn, I have watched your father's situation deteriorate for 2 years. I have watched Pierce circle this family for 6 months while I was still gathering evidence. I am not offering this because I want something from you. I am offering it because it is the right thing to do and I have the means to do it. Those are the only 2 reasons." A pause. "Will you let me?" She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the difference between men who offered help as a form of acquisition and men who offered it simply because the ground was there and they were standing on it. She thought about what it meant to accept help without surrendering anything. "Go tonight," she said, "before Pierce reaches Greer." He nodded. He picked up his coat. "Alexander," she said, before he reached the door. He turned. "When this is over," she said carefully, "and the dust has settled, whatever is left standing, I would like to understand why you came back. The real reason. Not Clara Osgood's case." She held his gaze. "The reason you rode through the night." He was quiet for a moment. "You already know the reason," he said. "I want to hear you say it." "When the time is right." "When the time is right," he said. "I will." He left. She stood in the empty front room with the note still on the mantelpiece and the evening settling dark around the estate. And she understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that the morning had been an ending, but the evening was something else entirely. It was the beginning of a fight, and Evelyn Caldwell, for the first time in 25 years, had no intention of sitting still for it. Alexander came back at midnight. Evelyn heard his horse in the courtyard and was already at the top of the stairs when he came through the front door. She had not slept. She had not tried to. She had spent the evening at the study desk with her father's ledgers spread open in front of her, going through the numbers the way she had taught herself to go through them 3 years ago, when she first understood that her father's careful, optimistic accounting had been concealing a slow bleed that nobody wanted to name out loud. She came down the stairs. He looked up. She read his face before he said a word. "Greer signed," she said. "Greer signed." He set his hat on the side table and ran a hand through his hair. He looked tired in the honest way of a man who has been working hard at something real rather than performing exhaustion. Pierce had already sent a messenger. Greer had the offer in hand when I arrived. "We negotiated for 2 hours. What did you offer him?" "A 3-year rate guarantee on the river routes, backed by my capital with the Caldwell name on the contract as co-guarantor." He paused. "Your father will need to agree to the terms in the morning." "They are fair terms. Better than what Pierce was on." "He'll agree," she said. "I know." He looked at her steadily. "Pierce is going to find out by morning. When he does, he will understand that this approach didn't work. And he will move to something else." "What something? No yet." He said it plainly, without dressing it up. But he is not a man who accepts a setback without a response. "We should expect something in the next few days." She nodded. She had already expected that. She had been sitting with the expectation of it for the last 4 hours, turning it over in her mind, the way you turn over ground before planting, trying to understand what was underneath before you committed to what came next. "Go home," she said. "Get some sleep. Come back in the morning when my father is up." He looked at her for a moment. "Are you all right?" "I've been asking myself that all day," she said. "I keep getting a different answer depending on what hour it is." "What hour is it now?" She looked at him. "The hour where I'm tired but not broken," she said. "Which is better than I expected." He held her gaze for a moment, and something in his expression did what it sometimes did, open slightly, showed the edge of something older and quieter than anything he was saying out loud. "Good," he said. "That's good, Evelyn." He left. She went back upstairs. She did not sleep well, but she slept. The next morning arrived with the particular cruelty of mornings that follow days that have dismantled something important, bright, and unremarkable, as though the world had no memory of the previous 24 hours and intended to simply carry on regardless. Evelyn was dressed and downstairs by 7. Her father came down at past, looking like a man who had also not slept, but had spent his wakeful hours doing something more productive than tossing. He sat across from her at the breakfast table and looked at the ledger she had left open beside her coffee cup. "You went through the numbers," he said. "I did." She looked at him. "It's manageable," she said. "It is genuinely manageable. Father, if we stop trying to maintain appearances that the finances no longer support. The Northern Land Trust is intact. Richard couldn't touch it before the marriage. And now he won't touch it at all. The shipping contracts, with Alexander's guarantee behind them, give us 3 years of stable income if we are careful." She paused. "We have to be careful." Her father wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at the ledger with the expression of a man confronting something he has been avoiding for a long time. "I should have shown you these years ago," he said. "Yes," she said simply. "You should have." He flinched slightly. She hadn't softened it. She was done softening things that didn't deserve softening. "I'm showing them to you now," he said. "Yes, you are." She closed the ledger. "That's where we start." Alexander arrived at 9 with Mr. Abner Fitch, who was a small, precise man in a brown coat, with the look of someone who had spent 40 years being underestimated and had found the experience professionally useful. He shook Evelyn's hand with a firmness that told her he had already been briefed and had already formed an opinion. They sat in the study, the 4 of them, and Fitch spread his own papers on the desk and went through the breach of contract claim with the methodical efficiency of a man who had seen this particular maneuver before. "Pierce's position is weak," Fitch said, adjusting his spectacles. "He can file, certainly. The mechanism exists. But for the claim to hold, he would need to demonstrate that the dissolution of the engagement was without cause, that Miss Caldwell acted capriciously or in bad faith. He tapped one of the documents Alexander had brought. These rather thoroughly demolished that argument. A man cannot claim wrongful abandonment by a woman he was planning to defraud. Can he argue the documents were falsified? Her father asked. He can argue anything, Fitch said dryly. The question is whether he can sustain the argument in front of a magistrate with a woman named Clara Osgood prepared to testify. He looked at Alexander. She is prepared to testify. She is, Alexander said. I received her confirmation by letter 2 days ago, Fitch nodded. Then my advice to you, Miss Caldwell, is this: do not settle. Do not negotiate. Do not give Richard Pierce a quiet exit from this situation. Let him file if he chooses. The moment he files, the documents and Miss Osgood's testimony become part of the public record. And the story that gets told in every parlor and courthouse in Virginia will be the true one. Not his version of it. He folded his hands on the desk. He knows this. I believe the letter from his attorney was intended to frighten you into a settlement before you had time to think clearly. My recommendation is that you write back today, through my office, and inform him that you welcome the opportunity to present your evidence before a magistrate. Silence. Her father looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Fitch. Draft the letter, she said. Fitch allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. I'll have it ready by this afternoon. Richard Pierce received the letter at 4 o'clock. Evelyn knew this because Nora, who had apparently decided that her role in this situation was to serve as an informal intelligence network, appeared at the estate gate at 4:15, slightly breathless, with the news that she had been at the millinery on Main Street when Pierce's man came out of the attorney's office, and Pierce himself had read the letter on the front step, and his face had done something that Nora described as looking like a man who had bitten into something he expected to be sweet. He went back inside, Nora said. He was in there for 40 minutes. Thank you. Nora, Evelyn said, you're welcome. A pause. Should I go back and watch The Office? Go home. Nora, I'm very good at watching things. Go home went. With the same small, useful smile she'd worn the evening before. Evelyn stood on the front step for a moment after the gate closed, feeling the afternoon air and thinking about Richard Pierce reading Fitch's letter on a public step and understanding, perhaps for the first time, that the ground he'd been standing on was not as solid as he had believed. Good, let him understand it. What she had not anticipated, what none of them had fully anticipated, was what Pierce did next. The first sign came the following morning, when the minister of the Harlow County Presbyterian Church, not Reverend Aldous, who had been gracious and discreet, but the younger minister at the second church, a man named Reverend Caulfield, who had always made Evelyn vaguely uneasy without her being able to say precisely why, delivered a sermon that, while never naming anyone directly, spoke at considerable length about the duties of women in the covenant of marriage and the spiritual dangers of pride and self-will in the female character. Evelyn heard about the sermon from her housekeeper, Mrs. Dolan, who had attended and come home with her jaw set at an angle that suggested she had spent the second half of the service composing a very pointed letter in her head. He didn't say your name, Mrs. Dolan reported, setting down the morning tray with more force than strictly necessary. But he didn't have to. Everyone knew. Everyone will always know, Evelyn said. He said, a woman who breaks a sacred promise, Mrs. Dolan's voice took on the particular tone of someone quoting, while simultaneously rejecting, brings ruin upon herself and dishonor upon her family. He said that. From the pulpit. Evelyn looked at her coffee cup. She thought about Reverend Caulfield, who she now recalled had been at 2 of the dinners Richard Pierce had hosted in the county last autumn. She thought about the way men built networks, not always with money, sometimes just with the currency of being in the same room at the right time. Being useful, being owed. Is Reverend Aldous still at the church on Millbrook Road? She asked. Yes, ma'am. I'd like to call on him this week. Would you send a note? Mrs. Dolan looked at her with an expression of solid approval. Yes, ma'am, gladly. The second sign came that same afternoon, in the form of a social call. Mrs. Cornelia Marsh arrived with her daughter Frances. both of them dressed with the particular care of women who are performing friendliness while conducting an inspection. Mrs. Marsh was one of the most socially influential women in the county. She sat at the center of a web of relationships that determined who was invited where, whose name appeared in what context, whose mistakes became stories, and whose stories were quietly forgotten. Evelyn received them in the front parlor. She served tea. She was perfectly composed. Mrs. Marsh was skilled at the kind of conversation that says one thing on the surface and something entirely different beneath it. She spoke of the weather, of a relative's recent travel, of the lovely spring they were having, and while she spoke, she watched Evelyn with the careful, measuring attention of a woman deciding how to price something. Finally, with the precision of a surgeon making an incision, "I was so sorry to hear about the engagement, dear. Such a difficult thing, for everyone. For some more than others," Evelyn agreed pleasantly. "Of course, these things happen." Mrs. Marsh set down her cup. "Though I do wonder, and I say this only as someone who has known your family for many years, whether a quieter resolution might have served everyone better. Less public, less." She paused, choosing the word with care. "Disruptive." Mrs. Marsh. Evelyn's just as pleasantly. "Do you know a woman named Clara Osgood? She lives in Charleston, Mrs." Marsh blinked. "I don't believe I do. She is the mother Richard Pierce's 7-month-old son." Evelyn lifted her own cup. "I wonder if a quieter resolution would have served her better." The silence that followed was absolute. Frances stared at her mother. Mrs. Marsh stared at Evelyn. Then something moved in Cornelia Marsh's expression, something that shifted the calculation entirely. She was not, Evelyn realized, a wicked woman. She was a woman who had spent decades operating within a system that rewarded certain things and punished others. And she had become expert at navigating that system, which was not the same as endorsing it. A child, Mrs. A boy, 7 months old. Evelyn set down her cup. "I am not telling you this as gossip, Mrs. Marsh. I am telling you because you are a person of influence in this county, and I believe you are also a person of conscience. And because I think those two things, when they work together rather than against each other, can accomplish something." She paused. "Richard Pierce is going to try to make my family pay for the fact that I refuse to marry him knowing what I know. I intend to fight that, but I cannot fight it alone, Mrs." Marsh was very still. "What is it you're asking?" she said. "I'm not asking for anything specific," Evelyn said. "I'm asking you to know the truth. What you do with it is your own affair." She held the older woman's gaze. "It always is." Mrs. Marsh looked at her for a long moment. Then she straightened slightly, and something in her expression closed not against Evelyn, but around something she was deciding to hold carefully. "I will call on Mrs. Ellsworth this week," she said. Which appeared to be a non sequitur, but was, Evelyn suspected, anything but. "That sounds like a lovely idea," Evelyn said. Frances looked between the two of them, with the expression of someone watching a chess game in a language they're still learning. After they left, Evelyn sat alone in the parlor for a moment and let herself feel what the last 2 days had been, the weight of it, the relentlessness of it, the particular exhaustion of having to be precise and measured and clear-headed when what she actually wanted, somewhere underneath all of it, was to go somewhere very quiet and be furious for an uninterrupted hour. She allowed herself 30 seconds of that, then she went back to the study. The twist came on the 3rd day. It came in the form of a letter, but not from Pierce's attorney this time. And not from anyone Evelyn had expected. It came from a man named George Osgood, Clara's brother. She read it standing in the hallway where the courier had handed it to her, because she couldn't wait to get to the study. George Osgood wrote that he had heard, through Alexander Whitaker, of what had occurred in Harlow County. He wrote that his sister had asked him to reach out. And then he wrote the thing that made Evelyn go very still in the middle of her own hallway. He wrote that Richard Pierce had contacted Clara directly 3 days ago, which meant the day after Evelyn had sent her letter to Clara, which meant the day after Pierce had received Fitch's response. He had sent Clara a private message through an intermediary offering her a financial settlement in exchange for her withdrawal from any potential legal proceedings and her written assurance that she would not speak publicly about the child or its parentage. He was trying to buy Clara's silence before the case could be built. Before Clara could testify, he had found out about Clara's communication with Alexander. Evelyn didn't know how. Not yet, and he was moving to neutralize the only witness who could corroborate everything. Evelyn read the letter twice. Then she walked to the study, sat down at the desk, and wrote 3 letters in rapid succession, one to Alexander, one to Fitch, and one to Clara Osgood directly. The letter to Clara Troslat. And she wrote it slowly, because it mattered more than the others, and she wanted every word to carry its full weight. She wrote, "I do not know what he offered you, and I will not pretend I understand the position you are in. Because I don't, not fully. You have a child to think about. And that changes every calculation in ways I have no right to judge. But I want you to know this: if you choose to stand, you will not be standing alone. There are people here, including me, who are prepared to stand with you. Whatever you decide, that remains true. You have already been braver than most people will ever know." She sealed it. She gave it to the courier. Then she sat back and thought about Richard Pierce, about the efficiency of the man. The cold, systematic way he moved when cornered, attacking the supporting structures rather than the primary target, dismantling foundations rather than fighting directly. He was good at this. She could acknowledge that, without giving him anything she wasn't prepared to give. She was better at it than he knew. Alexander came that afternoon. He had received her letter. His expression when he walked in told her he had already been thinking the same things she had. "He knows about Clara and me working together," Alexander said, settling into the chair across the desk. "Someone in my office talked, or someone in hers. I don't know which. It doesn't matter right now. Can we protect the case if Clara takes the settlement? It weakens it significantly," he said honestly. Her testimony was the corroborating element for the Charleston engagements. "Without it, the documents I have are still damning. But Pierce will argue they were obtained improperly. And without a witness to support the pattern of behavior," he paused. "It becomes a document case rather than a character case. Harder to win. Then Clara cannot take the settlement. Clara may not have a choice," he said carefully. "She has a child and no husband, and a family that has already absorbed one scandal. The settlement Pierce is offering her." He stopped. "What is he offering her?" He told her the figure. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. It was not a small amount. It was, for a woman in Clara's position, the difference between a precarious life and a stable one. Between her son growing up in hardship and her son having something. She understood with sudden and complete clarity exactly what Pierce had calculated. He wasn't just buying silence. He was putting Clara in a position where choosing to speak cost her son something real and tangible. He was making Clara's courage into a luxury her child couldn't afford. It was, Evelyn thought, the most ruthless thing she had yet understood about this man. "We have to match it," she said. Alexander stared at her. "We have to offer Clara the same security without requiring her silence," Evelyn said. "If she has the money regardless of what she chooses to do, if her son is provided for either way, then Pierce's offer stops being a coercion and becomes just a choice." Alexander's voice was careful. "That is, do you understand what you're proposing? I'm proposing that we don't ask a woman with a 7-month-old child to martyr herself for our legal case," she said. "And yes, I understand what it costs. I understand it completely." She looked at him steadily. "My grandfather left me a personal trust, separate from the estate. Richard didn't know about it because my father never disclosed it during the engagement negotiations. It was the one thing he protected." She paused. "It is enough." The room was very still. Alexander looked at her for a long moment. His expression did the thing it sometimes did: shifted. Opened, showed the edge of something she still didn't have a name for, but was beginning to recognize. "You would spend your personal trust," he said, "on a woman you have never met. On a child I will never meet, she corrected. Yes, be quiet. I would pay it back, he said finally. No, she said firmly, you would not. This is mine to do. It is, she stopped, thought about how to say it. It is the thing I can do right now that is actually worth doing. Everything else is defense. This is something else. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, I'll arrange the transfer. Today, she said. Today, he agreed. Clara Osgood received the letter and the arrangement 3 days later. Her brother George wrote back within the week. Clara would testify. Richard Pierce received no response to his offer. He waited 5 days. Then his attorney sent a follow-up message to Clara's address in Charleston. By that time, Clara had already given her formal statement to a magistrate. The day Pierce found out the same afternoon, his attorney came to him with the news that Clara had testified. That the statement was entered into the official record. That the breach of contract claim he had filed against the Caldwells had just acquired a witness list that included a woman prepared to describe, in specific and corroborated detail, his conduct across 3 states was the same day he appeared, uninvited at the Caldwell estate for the last time. Evelyn heard the door before anyone could announce him. She heard the particular quality of footsteps that belong to a man who has decided that social convention no longer applies to him. Fast, hard, purposeful. She was in the study. She stood up. He came through the door without knocking. He was, for the first time since she had known him, not impeccable. His coat was slightly disheveled. His jaw was set in a way that had dropped all pretense of composure. You contacted her, he said. You found a way to, you arranged it so she wouldn't take. He stopped. Something moved across his face that she had never seen there before. Not anger, exactly. Something older and rawer than anger. I want to know how. You want to know how a woman with nothing but a trust fund and a good attorney outmaneuvered you, she said. Sit down, Richard. I then stand. She faced him squarely. She was not afraid. She found with something that felt almost like surprise that she was not even close to afraid. You are in my father's house. Uninvited, in violation of every convention you spent 6 months pretending to uphold. You will conduct yourself accordingly, or I will have you removed. He stared at her. You have nothing, he said. His voice had gone low. Without the estate, without a husband's name behind you. Without, I have exactly what I had this time last week, she said. My name, my father's land, my grandfather's trust. My own mind. She looked at him with the particular steadiness of a woman who has, in the space of 1 week, already survived the worst he could do. You have a breach of contract claim that is going to expose your conduct to public record. You have a child in Charleston that you have never acknowledged. You have the business relationships of 3 counties about to learn what Mr. Fitch's filing will make public. She paused. And you have a choice. Withdraw the claim today, and this ends quietly, not kindly, but quietly, or continue and everything comes out. Every document, every woman, every arrangement you made behind every engagement. Silence. Richard Pierce looked at her across the desk of her father's study, and she could see, clearly and without satisfaction, the moment he finished his calculation. He had run the numbers. They did not add up in his favor. You'll regret this, he said. It was the last retreat of a man who has run out of better options, not a threat. Not really, more like a reflex. I genuinely don't think I will, she said. He left. He withdrew the breach of contract claim 4 days later. The county heard the news the way the county always heard things, through a dozen conversations in a dozen parlors. Through the deacon's careful mention of it over Sunday coffee. Through Mrs. Cornelia Marsh, who had apparently called on Mrs. Ellsworth and 3 other women of significant social standing in the intervening week, and had said, with the authority of a woman who rarely deployed her full influence but was fully capable of doing so when she chose, that the Caldwell family had conducted themselves with integrity throughout a difficult situation, and that anyone who suggested otherwise would find her very specific and very pointed disagreement on the subject. Evelyn heard about Mrs. Marsh's intervention from Nora, who had apparently been listening at several relevant windows. "I told you she was on your side," Nora said. "You told me she seemed influential," Evelyn said. "Same thing." A pause. "Is it over now, with Richard?" Evelyn thought about that. She thought about the withdrawal notice sitting on Fitch's desk. She thought about Clara Osgood in Charleston, whose son was now provided for regardless of what the magistrate ultimately decided. She thought about her father, who had sat with her over the ledgers for 3 evenings running and who was beginning, slowly and with difficulty, to understand that the solution to the estate's problems had been sitting in his own study for years, and her name was Evelyn. "The worst of it is over," she said. "But no," she agreed. Not all of it. There was still the county's slow reassessment. There was still the work of rebuilding what the engagement had quietly cost the relationships deferred. The decisions left to a man who had not deserved the authority. There was still her father's debts, which were manageable but not small. There was still the question of who Evelyn Caldwell was going to be, now that she was no longer the woman who had almost married Richard Pierce. And there was Alexander Whitaker, who had been at the estate nearly every day for a week and a half, who had helped her fight every battle without once fighting it for her, who was careful and present and deliberately, consistently, unhurried. She had not forgotten what she'd said to him in the hallway of the Beaumont Inn. "When the time is right, I want to hear you say it." She wasn't sure yet that the time was right. She wasn't sure she knew how to judge that. But she was beginning to understand that right and ready were not always the same thing, and that one of them could arrive before the other. And that was not a failure. It was simply the truth about how healing worked. That evening, after Nora had gone and her father had retired and the house had settled into quiet, Evelyn sat alone in the study with the window open and the night air coming in cool from the direction of the creek. And she thought about the woman who had stood in this room 10 days ago in a dark blue dress with a letter in her hands and something still and resigned in her chest. She barely recognized her. She wasn't sure yet who she was becoming instead. But she was beginning to find out, and she was finding out on her own terms. And that, for the first time in 25 years, felt exactly like enough. 3 weeks after Richard Pierce withdrew his claim, Evelyn Caldwell did something she had not done in longer than she could clearly remember. She slept past sunrise, not because she was exhausted, though she had been, not because she had nowhere to be, though the particular relentlessness of the previous weeks had finally released its grip on her mornings. She slept past sunrise because somewhere in the night her body had simply decided that it was safe to rest. And that decision, quiet, involuntary, entirely without drama, felt like the first genuinely free thing she had done in years. She lay in bed for a while after she woke, looking at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the estate going about its morning without requiring anything of her. Mrs. Dolan in the kitchen, the groundsman outside, her father's slow, careful step in the hallway. He had developed the habit, over the past week, of moving more quietly past her door in the mornings, as though he was trying in this small way to give her something he hadn't known how to give her before. She noticed that. She didn't say anything about it. But she noticed. She got up eventually, dressed herself without calling her maid, and went downstairs to find her father already at the breakfast table with the ledger open in front of him and a pencil in his hand, which was new. 3 weeks ago, the ledger had lived in the study drawer, and her father had treated it the way people treat things they are afraid of. Now he had it at the breakfast table. Now he had a pencil. She poured her coffee and sat across from him and looked at the column he was working through. "You're overcounting the river freight margin," she said. "The rate guarantee Alexander negotiated includes a quarterly adjustment clause. You can't use last year's rate as the baseline." Her father looked up. Then he looked back at the column. Then he erased something. "Sit with me," he said. "Show me." She sat with him for an hour. They went through 3 months of projected figures together, the shipping revenue, The timber rights income from the parcels she had decided to lease rather than sell. The household accounts she had quietly restructured over the past 2 weeks by cutting expenses that had existed for the sole purpose of maintaining appearances that the family could no longer afford to maintain. It was not glamorous work. It was slow and careful and sometimes uncomfortable. Because the numbers told the truth about choices that had been made for the wrong reasons over a long time. But her father sat with it. He asked questions. He did not deflect or minimize or retreat behind the kind of vague optimism that had been his primary financial strategy for the better part of a decade. He was trying. It was not forgiveness, not yet, not fully. Not in the deep place where forgiveness actually lives. But it was the beginning of something she thought might eventually become it. The county, meanwhile, was doing what the county always did: processing. Reassessing, resorting the social arithmetic that a disruption of this kind inevitably scrambled. Mrs. Marsh had been quietly effective. The Minister Caulfield's sermon had been quietly countered by Reverend Aldous, who had called on the Caldwell family personally the week before and sat in the parlor for 2 hours and spoken about the nature of conscience, encouraged with the kind of deliberate pastoral clarity that left no reasonable person uncertain about where he stood. The openly hostile voices were fewer now. The cautious ones, the people who had been watching to see which way the prevailing wind settled before committing, were beginning to resolve in Evelyn's direction. Not all of them. Not quickly, but enough that she could walk down the main street of Harlow without the specific, skin-prickling awareness of being watched as a cautionary tale. She was walking down that street on a Tuesday morning, 3.5 weeks after the wedding that hadn't happened, when she ran into Thomas Ellsworth. He was coming out of his supply office as she was passing. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped when she saw him. There was a moment, brief, honest, slightly uncomfortable for both of them, in which the memory of him, standing in her front hallway with Judge Meade, hung in the air between them. Ellsworth cleared his throat. "Miss Caldwell," he said. "Mr. Ellsworth," she said. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has something to say and is working out the most efficient way to say it without sacrificing more dignity than strictly necessary. "I was not fully informed," he said finally, "at the time of my visit. I was acting on Pierce's account of the situation." And his account was. It was, she agreed. "I understand that now." He straightened slightly. "I want you to know that my business relationship with your family's shipping interests remains as it was. I have spoken with Greer to that effect." She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you, Mr. Ellsworth," she said. "I appreciate that." He nodded. He was about to move past her when she said quietly, "There is a woman in Charleston named Clara Osgood. She has a 7-month-old son and no reliable income. She was very courageous when it mattered. If you are ever in a position to recommend her brother George's freight brokerage to anyone in your Charleston network, I would consider it a personal kindness." Ellsworth looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, recognition. Perhaps of what she was doing and why. "I'll look into it," he said. "Thank you," she said again. She walked on. She was halfway home before she realized she was smiling. And that the smile had nothing to do with triumph and everything to do with something quieter, the particular satisfaction of having handled something well. On her own terms, without requiring anyone's permission or approval to do it. That was new. Or rather, it was old. It was something she had always been capable of, she thought, but had spent 25 years routing around obstacles that shouldn't have been there in the first place. She was still thinking about this when she arrived home to find Alexander's horse at the gate. He was in the front room with her father, the two of them bent over what appeared to be a map of the northern land parcels. They both looked up when she came in. "There's a merchant in Fredericksburg," Alexander said. Without preamble, because he had apparently decided that preamble was unnecessary between them now. "He's been looking for reliable shipping access to the river routes for 2 seasons. Greer knows him. I think it's worth a meeting." Evelyn put down her basket. "When?" "Next week, if you're willing. I thought your father might go." But frankly, he glanced at Edmund Caldwell with the careful tact of a man who likes someone and is trying not to embarrass him. "The merchant will respond better to someone who knows the numbers." Her father made a sound that was somewhere between affronted and resigned. "He's not wrong," he said. Evelyn looked at the map. She thought about a meeting in Fredericksburg. She thought about what it would mean to walk into a room with a merchant and represent her family's interests herself, not as a proxy for her father, not as a name attached to someone else's authority, but as the person who actually understood the ledgers and the contracts and the rate structures. "Set the meeting," she said. Her father looked at her with that expression he had been wearing more frequently lately, the one that was equal parts admiration and something more complicated. Something that looked like a man seeing a version of his daughter he had failed to properly look at before now. "I'll write to Greer today," Alexander said. He stayed for lunch. It had become a pattern over the past 3 weeks, not a deliberate one. Not arranged, simply the way the days had settled. He came in the mornings for the business matters, and then somehow it was noon. And Mrs. Dolan had made enough food and he stayed. He and her father talked. He and Evelyn talked. Sometimes the three of them sat in a quiet that was not uncomfortable, and that would have been 3 weeks ago entirely inconceivable after lunch. Her father excused himself to rest, and Evelyn and Alexander ended up in the study, which was also a pattern. The study, the afternoon light, the two of them on either side of the desk, with papers between them that they were usually not looking at. "Fitch sent a note," she said, sliding it across the desk. "Clara's statement has been formally accepted. The magistrate is reviewing the case." Alexander read it. "Pierce won't fight it," he said. "Not anymore. His attorney has been quietly negotiating terms for the past week. George Osgood wrote to me 2 days ago. He'll settle with Clara, he'll settle. Not generously, but he'll settle." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She thought about Clara Osgood, whom she had never met, whose face she could not picture, whose courage had been the hinge on which the entire last month had turned. "I want to visit her," she said, "when the legal matter is resolved. I want to go to Charleston and meet her in person." Alexander looked up from the note. He looked at her with that expression she had begun to catalog, the one that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite admiration, but lived somewhere in the territory between. "That is," he stopped. "Unusual," she offered. "I was going to say remarkable," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "It's not remarkable. It's just decent," he said quietly. Confused the two, she held his gaze for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. Then she looked back at the papers on the desk, but the words had landed, and she kept them. The twist came on a Thursday afternoon, 4 weeks after the broken engagement, and it came from a direction Evelyn had not expected. It came from Nora. Her cousin arrived at the estate gate in a state of visible agitation, not the bright, useful agitation of someone who has been listening at windows, but genuine distress. Her face was pale and her hands were not quite steady, and when Evelyn met her at the door, she grabbed Evelyn's arm without ceremony. "There is something you need to know," Nora said, "and I am sorry." "Evelyn, I am so sorry because I should have told you sooner, but I wasn't sure, and then I was sure, and I don't say it right now, I will lose my nerve entirely." Nora. Evelyn took her cousin's hands. "Breathe, then talk," Nora breathed. Then she talked. 2 days ago, she had been the Whitmore house, Mrs. Addie Whitmore, her mother's cousin, who had not forgiven Evelyn for the wedding cancellation and had been, according to Nora, conducting a sustained social campaign that stopped just short of open hostility. Nora had gone to try to smooth things over because Nora was 19 and still believed in the power of goodwill and pleasant conversation to resolve adult complications. At the Whitmore house, she had overheard something. Addie Whitmore had been entertaining 2 guests, women Nora didn't know well, from the next county over, and in the course of the conversation, which Nora had not been intended to hear because she had been in the adjacent room waiting for Addie to finish with her previous visitors, she had heard Addie say clearly, confidently, in the tone of someone sharing established fact that Alexander Whitaker had manufactured the evidence against Richard Pierce. That the documents he had brought were forged. That his motive was not justice but personal greed specifically. That he had been in dispute with Pierce over a business arrangement for 2 years and had used Evelyn's broken engagement as an instrument of revenge. That Evelyn, in this version of events, was not a woman who had made a courageous choice but a naive girl who had been manipulated by one scheming man into rejecting another. Nora had sat very still in the adjacent room. She had waited until the guests left. Then she had gone directly to the Caldwell estate. Evelyn listened to all of this without moving. Then she sat down. "Who are the women Addie was speaking to?" she said. "I don't know their names, but one of them had a very nice carriage. Blue with brass fittings. I noticed it outside. Did Addie say where she had gotten this version of events?" Nora hesitated. "She said she had heard it from Richard. Of course she had." Evelyn sat with this for a moment. She thought about the specific elegance of it, the way Pierce had taken the truth of Alexander's personal feelings for Evelyn and reframed them as evidence of manipulation. The way he had taken the fact of the business dispute, which was real, and used it to color everything else. The way the story, if you didn't know what Evelyn knew, was almost plausible. Almost. "Does Addie believe it?" Evelyn asked. Nora hesitated again. "I think," she said carefully, "that Addie wants to believe it." "There's a difference." "Yes," Evelyn said. "There is." She stood up. She thought for a moment. Then she made a decision. "Get your coat," she said. "We're going to call on Addie Whitmore." Nora stared at her. "Right now?" "Evelyn, if she's in the middle of Nora." She met her cousin's eyes. "I spent 6 months being gracious in situations that didn't deserve my grace. I have learned to be selective about it." She picked up her own coat from the hook. "Come." They arrived at the Whitmore house unannounced. Addie received them in the parlor with the particular expression of a woman who had not expected this and was rapidly reorganizing her social composure to accommodate it. She was gracious. She was always gracious. Whatever else she was, and she offered tea. And Evelyn accepted, and they sat. The first 5 minutes were surface "How are you?" "How is your father? Has the weather been treating the estate well?" Evelyn let Addie run through it. She was patient. She had been patient her entire life. And she had gotten better at knowing which patience was useful and which was simply avoidance. Then she said, "I heard something this week, Addie. Something that concerned me. About Alexander Whitaker." Addie's hand, wrapped around her teacup, went very slightly still. "Oh?" she said, with a careful neutrality that confirmed everything Nora had reported. "Someone told me there was a story circulating," Evelyn said pleasantly. "That he forged the documents, that his motive was revenge rather than justice." She looked at Addie directly. "I wanted to hear it from you, if you had heard it, rather than from someone else, because I would rather have a direct conversation than have a misunderstanding grow in the dark." Addie set down her cup. "Evelyn," she said, and her voice had shifted from social to something more personal. "I only want what's best for you. You must know that." "I know you believe that," Evelyn said. "Richard Pierce is whatever his faults, he is a powerful man. And Alexander Whitaker," she paused, "he has feelings for you. Everyone can see that. Which means his judgment where you are concerned is not." "The documents are in Richard Pierce's own handwriting," Evelyn said. "I recognized it. My father recognized it. Mr. Fitch, who has practiced law in this county for 40 years. Examined them and recognized them. Richard has not disputed their authenticity in any legal filing. The only place he has disputed them is in conversations he is having with women like you, through channels where there is no accountability for accuracy." She kept her voice entirely level. "The business dispute between Pierce and Alexander is real. It is also more than 2 years old and entirely unrelated to anything that happened on my wedding morning. If you would like, I can ask Mr. Fitch to send you the relevant correspondence so you can read it yourself." Addie was very quiet. "I have a 7-month-old boy in Charleston," Evelyn said. More quietly now, his name is not yet public. His mother is a woman who gave a sworn statement to a magistrate at considerable personal cost. These are not the actions of a forged narrative, she paused. I am not asking you to publicly defend me, Addie. I am asking you to stop repeating a story that isn't true. A long silence. Addie Whitmore was not a bad woman. Evelyn had always known that, even when it would have been simpler to decide otherwise. She was a woman who had operated within certain social boundaries for so long that the boundaries had become invisible to her. She moved within them the way fish move in water. Without noticing they were wet. Being asked to see the boundaries clearly was, for a woman like Addie, genuinely difficult, not dishonest. Difficult, I didn't know, Addie said finally about the child. No, Evelyn said. Most people don't. I am trusting you with it. Another silence. Addie looked at her hands. Then she looked at Evelyn with an expression that was older and more unguarded than her usual social face. You are not what I thought you were, she said. It was not an insult. It was something closer to an apology. No, Evelyn said gently. I don't think I am. She and Nora walked home in the late afternoon. Nora was quiet for the first half of the walk, which was unusual enough that Evelyn glanced at her. What is it? I'm thinking, Nora said, about how you did that. Did what? Walked in there and said all of it, and didn't she search for the word? You weren't cruel, you weren't even cold. But you didn't back down from a single thing. No, Evelyn agreed. I didn't. How did you know you wouldn't? Evelyn thought about that. She thought about the fireplace and the burning veil. She thought about the dark blue dress. She thought about Richard Pierce's voice going flat and cold in the inn's dining room, and the precise moment she had realized she was not afraid of it. I think, she said slowly, that there is a point where you have already lost the thing you were most afraid of losing. And once you've passed that point, the fear changes. It doesn't go away, but it stops being the deciding vote. Nora was quiet for a moment. What were you most afraid of losing? She asked. Evelyn considered it honestly. Myself, she said. They walked the rest of the way home without talking. And the silence was the good kind. That evening, Alexander came by for what had become, without either of them formally acknowledging it, something resembling a regular appointment. He sat across from her in the study. He read the note she had gotten from George Osgood regarding Clara. He told her about the meeting in Fredericksburg, now confirmed for Tuesday of the following week. Then he said, You went to see Addie Whitmore today. She looked up. Nora told you. Nora tells everyone everything, he said. It is her primary talent. She told me that too. Actually, she set down her pen. Yes, I went to see Addie. Pierce has been circulating a version of events that frames you as the manipulator and me as the victim of it. He was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. She looked at him sharply. You knew. I heard something 3 days ago. I didn't tell you because I was trying to determine how far it had spread before He stopped. Met her eyes. I was trying to protect you from it. She held his gaze for a long moment. Alexander, she said carefully and clearly, I appreciate that impulse. I genuinely do. But I need you to understand something. She leaned forward slightly. I spent 6 months with a man who managed what I knew and when I knew it, because he believed that was how you protected a woman. I need the people I trust to tell me the truth when they have it. Not when they've decided I'm ready for it. He looked at her. Something in his expression did what it sometimes did, shifted. Opened, showed the thing underneath that he still hadn't said out loud. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. Thank you, she said. A pause. There's something else, he said. Something I should have told you already. For the same reason. Tell me. He took a breath. The business dispute with Pierce, he said. It's real. It's over a contract dispute regarding the eastern shipping routes. 2 years ago. I was in the right legally, demonstrably, but the dispute cost me time and capital and a partnership I valued. And I want you to know that because Pierce's people will use it, and I don't want you to hear a version of it from someone else first. He paused. It did not affect my decision to bring you the documents. It did not affect my analysis of the evidence. But it is part of my history with Pierce, and you should have it. She looked at him for a long time. Did winning the dispute matter to you? She asked. When you brought me the evidence. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Yes, he said honestly, on some level, yes. I cannot tell you that it played no role in how I felt about Pierce's exposure. I can tell you it was not the reason I rode through the night. Those are two different things. They are, she agreed. And I need you to know the difference, he said, because you deserve to make an informed judgment about who I am. Not the version I would prefer you to see. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. I appreciate that, she said finally. More than I know how to say right now, he nodded. He looked at the papers on the desk. She looked at the papers on the desk. Outside, the evening was settling into the long golden Virginia dusk that came in late spring when the light stayed past its welcome and gilded everything it touched. Tuesday, she said. The Fredericksburg meeting. Tuesday, he confirmed. I'll be ready. She was. The meeting in Fredericksburg was everything Fitch had told her. These meetings could be formal and careful and slightly tense in the way of first business encounters between people who are trying to establish trust without revealing more than necessary. The merchant, a man named Aldous Carey, was in his 60s and had the look of someone who had seen enough business arrangements go wrong that he had become constitutionally cautious about new ones. He had clearly expected Edmund Caldwell. He had clearly not expected Evelyn. She could see it in the adjustment of his expression when she sat down across from him, not hostility. Simply the rapid reorganization of expectations. She had seen that expression on men's faces her entire life. She had learned in the past few weeks to let it run its course and then simply be herself clearly and precisely enough that the reorganization completed and they could proceed. She walked him through the rate structure. She walked him through the northern land parcel leases and what they meant for stable long-term income from the Caldwell side of the arrangement. She answered his questions directly and without hedging. And when he pushed on 2 points, she held her ground with specific kind of calm that comes from knowing the numbers better than the person questioning them. At the end of 2 hours, Carey looked at her across the table with an expression that had completed its reorganization entirely. Your father is fortunate, he said, to have someone who understands the business this thoroughly. My father taught me to read ledgers, she said. I did the rest myself. Carey looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Alexander, who had been sitting slightly to the side. Present but quiet, in the particular way he had of being in a room without taking it over. She's good, Carey said to Alexander, as though this was a piece of information Alexander required. Yes, Alexander said. Carey signed the preliminary agreement before they left. On the road home, they were quiet for the first stretch, the comfortable quiet. The one that had become its own kind of language between them. The afternoon had gone warm and the road ran through stands of old timber and past fields going green with the season. You held the margin on the quarterly adjustment, Alexander said eventually. He pushed twice and you didn't move. He was testing me, she said. He wasn't going to push a third time, I know. I was watching you decide that in real time. A pause. It was something to watch. She felt the words settle somewhere in her chest, not with the warm, performed pleasure of a compliment received graciously, but with something quieter and more fundamental, the acknowledgement of a person who had seen her work and was not pretending it was something other than what it was. Alexander, she said. When we get home, she kept her eyes on the road. I want to have a different kind of conversation, not about Fredericksburg, not about Fitch, not about the ledgers. A pause. I think I'm ready for the different kind of conversation. The road was quiet around them. A bird called somewhere in the timber, then stopped. All right, he said. His voice was careful. Careful in the way of a man who is trying very hard to be steady about something that is costing him steadiness. Not tonight, she said. Tomorrow, when there's no business to hide behind. Tomorrow, he agreed. She looked at him then just briefly, just long enough to see his expression, which was the most unguarded she had yet seen it, and which had in it something she finally after 4 weeks and one entirely upended life, had a name for. It was hope, plain, honest, patient hope, the kind that doesn't demand anything. The kind that has been sitting quietly in a corner, tending to itself for a very long time. She looked back at the road. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. She didn't sleep well. Not because she was afraid. She had moved past the particular geography of that fear weeks ago and had no intention of returning to it. She didn't sleep well because something in her was awake and alert, in the way of a person standing at the edge of something they've been walking toward for a long time. And that kind of alertness does not submit to sleep no matter how tired the body is. Tomorrow, she had said, when there's no business to hide behind. She lay in the dark and listened to the estate settle around her and thought about what she was going to say. Not the words exactly. She had learned in the past 5 weeks that scripting conversations was a way of trying to control outcomes that were inherently uncontrollable. And she was done doing things for the sake of control. But the shape of it, the truth she wanted to put into the room. She thought about the woman who had stood at this window 5 weeks ago, watching a rider arrive in the dark, and feeling something she had been carefully not naming for 3 years. She thought about what it had cost her to stop not naming it. Then she thought about Alexander's face on the road home from Fredericksburg, that expression, plain and unguarded and patient, that she had finally recognized for what it was. She turned over. She closed her eyes. She slept. She was downstairs at 8, which was earlier than she'd intended, but her body had apparently made its own decision about how long to wait. Her father was already at the breakfast table, with the ledger. It was a genuine habit now, not performance, and she found that she was moved by it in a way she hadn't expected. Moved by the simplicity of a man trying, late and imperfectly, to do better. "You're up early," he said, looking at her over the ledger with the particular attention he'd been giving her lately, the kind that was trying to make up for lost time without making the attempt too obvious. "I have things to do today," she said. "The carry agreement needs to be countersigned by Thursday. Fitch sent a note last evening. I left it on the desk. I'll look at it this morning." She poured her coffee. "Alexander is coming by today." Her father was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ledger. Then he looked at her, with an expression she recognized as the one he used when he was going to say something that cost him something. "He is a good man," her father said. "I know I have not always. I know I did not." He stopped. "Try it again. I should have seen what was in front of me 3 years ago. I should have paid attention to what you needed rather than what I needed the situation to be." He set down his pencil. "I am sorry for that, Evelyn. I have been sorry for it since the morning he wrote in. But I haven't known how to say it directly." She looked at her father, really looked at him. At the man he was when he wasn't hiding behind his own optimism and his fear and his careful management of what the world was allowed to see. He was not a bad man. He had never been a bad man. He was a man who had been afraid for a long time and had made the classic mistake of the frightened. He had protected himself instead of the people who needed him. "I know," she said gently. "I know, but will you forgive me?" he asked. It was a simple question, plainly asked, and it cost him something to ask it that plainly. She thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "Not all at once, but yes." He nodded. He picked up his pencil. She drank her coffee. The morning moved around them, unhurried, and it was not perfect. Nothing was perfect, but it was honest, and honest was better. Alexander arrived at 10. She heard his horse as she always did. She was in the study, looking at Fitch's note, and she set it down and sat for a moment before she went to meet him. She gave herself that moment not to prepare, not to compose, just to be in the room with what she was about to do before she did it. Then she went to the hall. He came through the door with his hat in his hand, and his expression already careful. He had been carrying the careful all morning. She could see that, the way a person carries something fragile. He looked at her and said nothing for a moment. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. Her father appeared briefly in the hallway, looked at the two of them, and said he had some things to see to in the back of the house. He said it with the elaborate casualness of a man who had decided to be useful and was moderately pleased with himself for managing it. Then it was just the two of them in the hallway, and the house was quiet around them. "Come in," she said, "not the study. The parlor." He followed her in. They sat not across a desk, not with papers between them. Just two chairs, the morning light, and the particular quality of a silence that is waiting for something to begin. "You said yesterday," he started. "I did," she said. "And I meant it. But let me go first." She looked at him directly. "I need to say something before you say whatever you've been preparing to say. Because I have spent 5 weeks being very clear about what I will not do, and what I will not accept, and what I will not give away. And I have been right about all of it. But I have not said anything about what I want." She paused. "I want to say that first." He was very still. "All right," he said. She took a breath. Not to steady herself, she was steady. Just to give the words the space they deserved. "3 years ago," she said. "When you left, I told myself I wasn't waiting for you. I told myself for 3 years, in fact, with considerable persistence. And I was not waiting in the way of a woman who has decided to hold her life in suspension until a man comes back. I did not do that, but I was aware every time a carriage came up the road, every time someone mentioned your name, every time I tried to feel something for Richard Pierce that I could not feel no matter how reasonable it seemed, I was aware of something missing. With a specific shape, she held his gaze. I am not telling you this to give you anything you haven't earned. I am telling you because you have been honest with me and you deserve the same in return." The room was very quiet. "I am not the woman I was 5 weeks ago," she continued. "Not because of what happened with Richard, or not only because of that. Because of what came after. Because of the ledgers and the meetings and Addie Whitmore's parlor and the magistrate's office and the conversation I had with my father this morning." She paused. "I have been learning, these past weeks, what it feels like to live as myself. Not as someone's daughter or someone's intended or someone's idea of a suitable woman. As myself. And I find I am not willing to give that up. Not for anything, not for anyone. I would never ask you to," he said. His voice was quiet and entirely certain. "I know," she said. "That is part of what I'm trying to say." She looked at him, at the steadiness of him. The patience, the way he had been in her life these past weeks, like a good foundation under uncertain ground. Present without pressing, strong without requiring her to be smaller. "I am not choosing you," she said, "because you saved me. I am not choosing you because I am grateful, or because the county needs a resolution, or because my father has eyed you're a good man." She felt the words settle as she said them. Felt their weight and their rightness simultaneously. "I am choosing you because when I imagine the life I am building, the real one, the honest one, the one that is actually mine, you are already in it. Not as a rescue, as a partner." She paused. "That is what I wanted to say first." Alexander looked at her for a long moment. His jaw moved slightly. He looked at the window, then he looked back at her, and when he did, his expression was the most open she had ever seen it, not performing openness, not managing it, just genuinely, completely unguarded in a way that must have cost him something. "I have loved you," he said. "Since the autumn you corrected my accounting error at your father's dinner table and then immediately apologized for it, as though knowing the right answer was something to be sorry for." His voice was low and even and entirely without decoration. "I have loved you through 3 years of silence that I imposed on myself because I believed you deserved a life that was your own choice rather than my longing. I have loved you while watching you negotiate a shipping contract in Fredericksburg and argue with a judge in your own hallway and write a letter to a woman you had never met because it was the decent thing to do." He paused. "I am not asking you to belong to me, Evelyn. I have never wanted that. I am asking to belong to your life, in whatever form you decide that takes. On whatever terms are yours." She looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said quietly, "is the right thing to say. I've been working on it," he said. With the ghost of that rare, genuine smile, "I could tell," she said. And then the space between them was smaller than it had been. and neither of them was entirely sure who had moved. And it didn't matter. She took his hand, not dramatically. Not with ceremony, just took it, the way you take hold of something you intend to keep. He looked down at their joined hands. Then he looked at her face. "Tomorrow," he said carefully, "I would like to speak with your father. He is in the back of the house," she said, pretending to have things to see to. The ghost of the smile became the actual thing. "Of course he is," he said. They sat like that for a while, her hand in his. The morning moving around them, the estate making its ordinary sounds. It was not the most dramatic moment of the past 5 weeks. It was, in fact, entirely quiet, but quiet, she had learned, was not the same as small. Her father wept slightly when Alexander spoke with him. He denied it immediately afterward and went to get more coffee. And Evelyn and Alexander had the good grace to not remark on it. The weeks that followed were the best kind of busy. The Carey contract was finalized and signed, and the first shipment went through the river route in early June without incident. Her father began meeting with Fitch weekly, not because he was required to, but because he had decided, somewhere in the past month, that understanding what was happening with his own estate was preferable to being managed by it. He was not a natural businessman, he never would be. But he was trying in a way that was genuine rather than performative. And that counted for something real. The magistrate's review of Clara Osgood's case concluded in late May. Pierce settled not generously, as Alexander had predicted, but substantially. Clara wrote to Evelyn when it was done. The letter was short and direct, and at the end of it she wrote, "I did not know, when I went to Mr. Whittaker's office, that it would lead to any of this. I only knew I was tired of being quiet about it. You made it easier to stop being quiet. I don't know how to thank you for that, except to say that my son will know, when he is old enough, that there were people who thought he deserved to exist in the light." Evelyn read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer of her desk, where she kept things that mattered. The county continued its slow reassessment. It was not uniform, and it was not fast, and there were still people, Reverend Caulfield among them, who had settled into a version of events that was more comfortable for them than the truth. Evelyn had made a decision about those people. She was not going to spend her energy trying to convert them. She was going to live so clearly and so well that the truth made its own argument. Mrs. Marsh had become, against all expectation, a genuine ally. She had not announced this. She had simply begun, in the way of women who wield influence quietly, to be present in the right rooms at the right moments, saying the right things in the even, authoritative voice that people in Harlow County had been deferring to for 30 years. It was not heroic. It was simply useful, and Evelyn had learned to be grateful for useful. Nora had been right about Mrs. Dolan saying Alexander was handsome. She brought it up 3 more times over the following weeks, each time with increasing confidence that she was making a useful observation. Evelyn sent her home each time. She stopped being convincing about it somewhere around the 2nd week of June. The formal engagement, the real one, the chosen one, was announced in early July. No rush ceremony, no flowers shipped from Richmond to prove something. Just a quiet notice in the county record and a dinner at the Caldwell estate with the people who had actually been present for what the past 2 months had been. Fitch came. Reverend Aldous came. George Osgood came down from Charleston. Quiet and steady, and with the particular warmth of a man who has good reason to be grateful. Nora came and behaved herself for approximately 40 minutes before making a remark about brass fittings that nobody else at the table understood. Her father sat at the head of his table, his home, still standing, still his, and looked at the people around it with an expression that Evelyn had not seen on his face in years. Not relief exactly, not just gratitude, something older and simpler than either. He looked like a man who had been given back something he had almost thrown away. After dinner, when the guests had moved to the front room and the evening had gone soft and golden, Alexander found Evelyn standing in the hallway with a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, looking at nothing in particular, "You're thinking," he said. "I'm always thinking," she said. "You've known me long enough to know that. What are you thinking about?" She considered it honestly. "The morning," she said. "The letter. The veil, the dress." She paused. "I've been thinking about the woman who stood there. What she believed about herself, what she had decided was possible. And," she looked at him. "I feel sorry for her," she said. "Not in a pitying way. In the way you feel sorry for someone who was carrying something very heavy and didn't know they were allowed to put it down." He was quiet for a moment. "She put it down, she did," Evelyn agreed. He took the glass of wine from her hand, set it on the side table, and took her hand in its place. She looked at their joined hands and thought about how ordinary the gesture was, how completely, entirely ordinary, and how that ordinariness was, in fact, the whole point. The twist came in the last week of July. It came, as significant things often did, from an unexpected direction. A letter arrived from Richmond, not from an attorney this time, not from anyone connected to Pierce. It was from the Richmond Ladies Educational Society, a recently formed organization that was attempting to establish a network of small schools in underserved counties throughout Virginia. They had heard through Reverend Aldous, Evelyn suspected, who had connections she had not fully mapped about her work with the estate's tenant families, specifically about the informal reading instruction she had been providing 2 mornings a week to the children on the Caldwell property who were too young or too far from town to attend a county school. She had not mentioned this to anyone outside the estate. It had not been a program or an initiative. It had simply been something she did because the children were there and they wanted to learn, and she knew how to teach. The letter asked if she would be willing to meet with the society's director, a woman named Mrs. Frances Beaumont, to discuss the possibility of establishing a formal school on the northern parcel land. A school that would serve not only the Caldwell tenants, but the 3 adjacent properties as well. A school that the society was prepared to partially fund if Evelyn was prepared to help run it. She read the letter standing in the hallway the way she had read the letter 5 weeks ago that had changed everything. This time her hands didn't tremble. She went to find Alexander. He was in the study, reviewing the updated river route schedules with her father. They both looked up when she came in. She handed Alexander the letter without a word. He read it. His expression shifted, not surprise. Exactly. More like a man watching something land exactly where it was always going to land. "Well," he said. "Well," she agreed. Her father looked between them. "What is it?" Evelyn, Alexander said, handing the letter to Edmund, "is about to become considerably busier than she already is." Her father read it. He read it again. Then he set it down on the desk and looked at his daughter with an expression that was so thoroughly devoid of the old condescension, the gentle, affectionate, entirely unconscious condescension of a man who had never once questioned whether his daughter's mind was as good as his own. Because the question had never occurred to him, that she felt the absence of it like a room that has been opened and aired for the first time in years. "How much land would the school need?" he asked. She blinked. "I haven't worked through the specific. The northwestern corner of the northern parcel," he said. "Near the creek. Good drainage, solid ground, close enough to the road that families can get their children there in reasonable weather." He looked at her with the expression of a man who has finally, entirely, correctly understood the situation. "If we set aside 4 acres, would that be sufficient for a building and a yard?" She looked at her father. "Yes," she said, "that would be more than sufficient." "Then let's do that," he said simply. She wrote to Mrs. Beaumont that afternoon. The meeting happened 2 weeks later. Frances Beaumont was in her 50s, a compact, intelligent woman with a directness that Evelyn found immediately comfortable, and a habit of asking the exact right question at the exact right moment that suggested she had been running things efficiently for a very long time. They talked for 3 hours. By the end of it, the outlines of something real had begun to take shape, not finished. Not funded, not yet, but genuinely possible, in the way that things become possible when the right people sit in the same room and stop pretending that possibility requires permission. Evelyn came home that evening, with the feeling she'd had after the Fredericksburg meeting, but larger. Deeper. The particular satisfaction of something that was not just competent but meaningful. Something that had not existed before she walked into a room and made it begin to exist. Alexander was waiting on the front step when she arrived. He looked at her face and said nothing for a moment. "Good, good," she said. "Really good," he smiled. The real one, the rare one, the one she had earned. The school opened the following spring. It was small at first, 12 children. 2 mornings a week, in a clean, solid building on the northwestern corner of the northern parcel. Evelyn taught Mondays and Wednesdays herself. She hired a second teacher for Thursdays. A young woman from Richmond with a certificate and a sensible approach, and absolutely no tolerance for the idea that the children of tenant farmers were inherently less capable of learning than anyone else's children. The county noticed, and not all at once, but enough. Parents who had never expected their children to have access to formal schooling started making sure they arrived on time. The children, for their part, were relentless and extraordinary, and constantly surprising. Which Evelyn had expected, because she had always known this was true and had been waiting for an appropriate venue to prove it. Mrs. Marsh donated materials. Reverend Aldous wrote a letter of endorsement that appeared in the county record. George Osgood, who had returned to Charleston after the dinner in July but had stayed in correspondence with both Evelyn and Alexander, arranged for a supply of books from a Charleston educational charity that had more than it needed. The school grew. By autumn it had 22 students. By the following spring, 31. By the time Evelyn and Alexander were married a clear October morning. Reverend Aldous officiating. The church on Millbrook Road with no flowers shipped from anywhere, because the ones from the Caldwell Garden were sufficient and honest and real. The school had been running for 7 months and was already being discussed by Mrs. Beaumont's society as a model for 2 other counties. The wedding was small, deliberately, consciously small. The people who mattered were there: her father, Nora, Fitch, Aldous, a few friends who had proved themselves real over the past several months. Alexander's sister came from Richmond with her husband and their 2 daughters, both of whom attached themselves to Nora immediately, which Nora handled with the aplomb of someone who had always known she would be good at exactly this. There was no long train, there were no seed pearls. There was a dress she had chosen herself, in a color that suited her. And there was Alexander at the front of the church, turning to watch her come down the aisle with an expression so unguarded that several women in the front row had to locate their handkerchiefs. When Reverend Aldous asked if she took Alexander Beaumont Whitaker to be her husband, she said yes, the way she had learned to say all the important things clearly, directly, without apology, and entirely of her own will. He said yes the same way. Afterward, at the small dinner at the estate, her father stood and raised his glass and said with the simplicity of a man who had learned, late and at some cost, that simplicity was usually the most honest option, that he was grateful. That he was grateful for his daughter's courage. That he was grateful for the man she had chosen. That he was grateful, most of all, that he had been given the chance to do better than he had done before. It was not a polished toast. It was not eloquent. It landed the way honest things land, directly, without cushioning, in the place where people actually live. Evelyn reached across the table and took her father's hand. He held on. Years later, when the school had grown into something the county pointed to with a pride it had not originally earned, when the Caldwell shipping routes were stable and well managed, and no longer a source of the particular dread that had haunted Edmund Caldwell's mornings for a decade, when Nora had married a decent man from the next county and named her first daughter after a woman she had met in Charleston, Evelyn Caldwell Whitaker would sometimes think about the morning that had started it all. The letter, the fireplace, the dark blue dress, the sound of hoofbeats in the dark before sunrise. She thought about the woman who had stood at that window and seen a rider arrive and felt something shift in her chest, something she had been carefully not naming for 3 years. something that had been waiting with a patience she had not deserved to have asked of it. She thought about what that woman had not yet known about herself. What she had been about to find out, what it had cost her and what it had given back, and how those two things were not separate, were never separate, were always part of the same movement. She did not wish the morning had been different. She did not wish she had been spared any of it. She wished, if she wished anything, that she could go back and tell the woman in the dark blue dress one thing. You are not as gentle as they think. You are not as compliant as they are counting on. And the life that is waiting for you on the other side of this morning, the real one, the honest one, the one that is actually yours, is worth every step of the ground between here and there. Walk. Evelyn Whitaker had walked, and she had never once looked back.